I never thought life could unravel so quickly. One moment, I was the center of my family's universe, the one everyone turned to for advice, guidance, or comfort. The next, I was a ghost in my own home, invisible, unwanted, and betrayed. My name is Harold Bennett, though I suppose names don't matter much when people you trusted most have decided you no longer do. At 63, I had lived a quiet, disciplined life. I built my career, raised my son with care, and watched my daughter-in-law blossom into someone I thought I could rely on. I was wrong. Terribly, fatally wrong. The house we lived in had been my sanctuary for decades. Every corner whispered memories, birthday parties, late-night talks, Christmas mornings with laughter spilling through the halls. My late wife, Eleanor, had passed 10 years ago, leaving me to navigate the world alone. But I had my son, Peter. Peter was my pride, my legacy. Until he wasn't. I still remember the day I held Peter's hand in the hospital, watching him fight the illness that stole him from me. I prayed, begged, bargained with some invisible force, but it was futile. And when he was gone, the world itself seemed to contract around me. The funeral was a blur, faces blurred with tears, hands shaking, flowers that smelled too sweet, words that tasted hollow. Everyone except her. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, stood there composed, almost too composed, like a portrait of control, while I crumbled beside his coffin. She whispered something to my son's best friend. I couldn't hear it, but the glance she shot me afterward didn't belong to someone grieving. It belonged to someone already thinking 2 steps ahead. That night, she came to me in the dim light of my living room. The words still echo in my head, jagged and precise. You have 4 weeks to get out. I stared at her, unable to process the casual cruelty. The walls I had built with love, the home filled with memories, the life I had dedicated to raising my family. It was all being stripped from me by the very person I had welcomed into my heart. Her eyes didn't flinch, they didn't apologize. There was no warmth, no sorrow for the man who had lost a son, just a quiet, calculated demand. 4 weeks, that was it. I left that night, dragging the last of my belongings into a car that felt heavier with every mile. The darkness of the highway matched the darkness that had settled into my chest. I realized then that grief wasn't just sorrow, it was a tool. And I had just been handed an instrument to cut deeper than pain alone. As I drove through the empty streets, I vowed one thing: I wouldn't just survive this betrayal. I would make sure she, and anyone complicit, would understand the full weight of what they had done. I didn't know how yet. But I knew one truth: when a person you trust shatters your world, revenge isn't just temptation. It becomes necessity. The morning after I left, I parked my car on the outskirts of town, staring at the horizon as if it might offer answers. But the truth was, the betrayal had already found me, and it had taken the form of a single, horrifying revelation. Vanessa hadn't just told me to leave because of grief or inconvenience. She had orchestrated something far worse. I learned it the hard way from a lawyer's cold, detached voice on the other end of a phone call. "Mr. Bennett," he said, clearing his throat like he was delivering the verdict of a court, "your son's estate has been transferred entirely to your daughter-in-law. You have no claim. No inheritance, no rights to the house, nothing. Everything is hers." I dropped the phone, my hands trembling. I wanted to scream, to curse, to throw something, but my voice caught in my throat, trapped in disbelief. Peter had worked tirelessly, investing, saving, building a life that I thought would benefit our family. Every stock, every property, every account, I had assumed they were part of our shared legacy. But Vanessa had manipulated, forged, and maneuvered behind my back. She had lured Peter into trusting her completely, whispering sweet lies, painting herself as the devoted wife while slowly poisoning his decisions. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the power she had stolen. The right to dictate my son's final wishes, to erase me from the life I had helped create. She had flipped the very foundation of my family, turning it against me. Even my friends, lawyers, and advisors were reluctant to intervene. The paperwork was flawless, the signatures authenticated, the timing calculated to perfection. I wasn't just betrayed, I was outmaneuvered, outclassed, and publicly humiliated. That night, I returned to the empty house one last time. Every corner mocked me. The faded pictures of Peter and me, the shelf of trophies I had proudly displayed, the kitchen where we had shared so many quiet dinners. And in the middle of it all, I saw it, a letter from Vanessa. She didn't even need to speak. The words were sharp, concise, and cruel. "Consider this a fresh start, Harold. A clean break, you're in my way. My pulse raced as I read it over and over. The audacity. The cold precision. She had waited for the funeral, played the grieving widow perfectly, and then, in the quiet aftermath, delivered the final blow. I felt my anger twist into something darker, something calculated. Revenge wasn't an idea anymore. It was a requirement, a methodical obligation. I couldn't let this pass. I spent hours walking the empty hallways, the moonlight slicing through the curtains, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. Each shadow seemed to whisper strategies, possibilities, weaknesses. If grief had left me vulnerable, betrayal had sharpened me. I would not be cast aside like a disposable relic of my son's life. Not by her. Not by anyone. I couldn't sleep that night. Not truly. I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment, every smile, every word Vanessa had spoken, trying to pinpoint when the betrayal had begun. Was it always there, hidden beneath the surface? Or had she only revealed it when she knew I was at my most vulnerable? The thought gnawed at me, a slow poison in my chest. Anger battled grief in a relentless cycle. Some nights I wanted to call her, to scream until my voice shattered the walls. Other nights I imagined curling into a corner, letting the world forget I existed, letting the weight of everything crush me. But every time I drifted toward surrender, a spark of something darker flared, the desire to fight back. To reclaim what had been stolen, not just the money, not just the house, but my dignity, my voice, my right to remember my son on my own terms. I began replaying conversations, searching for clues I'd missed. The casual comments she made, the way she subtly undermined me in front of Peter, the way she smiled a little too knowingly at moments I hadn't understood at the time. It all became clear, like pieces of a puzzle snapping into place. She had been meticulous, patient, strategic, and I had been blinded by trust and love. I also hated myself for letting it happen. I had always prided myself on discernment, on intuition. Yet here I was, a 63-year-old man, stripped of everything, outmaneuvered by someone I thought I could rely on. The thought of my son, gone and manipulated by her in the last days of his life, twisted my stomach. I imagined Peter watching from somewhere, wishing I had seen it sooner, wishing I had been sharper, stronger, smarter. But grief and anger alone weren't enough. I needed clarity. I needed strategy. Every night I wrestled with my own mind, asking questions I didn't yet have answers to. What did I really want? Justice, revenge, or the satisfaction of making her feel even a fraction of the pain she had inflicted? And more importantly, was I capable of it? Could I cross the line into calculated retaliation without losing myself entirely? The more I thought, the more I realized something crucial. Rage alone would destroy me. I had to transform it into something deliberate. Every step, every decision, every word spoken in the coming weeks would need to be precise. I could not afford mistakes. Revenge demanded patience, observation, cunning. It demanded discipline, a mental rigor far more taxing than any physical endurance. By dawn, I had made a silent vow. I would not let grief drown me. I would not let betrayal define me. Vanessa had underestimated one thing: the quiet, slow, burning persistence of a man wronged. And while I mourned my son and the life I had lost, I began constructing a new resolve. I would rise from the ashes of this betrayal, not as a broken man, but as a force she could not ignore, one she would never forget. I spent the first week in silence, letting the world forget I existed while my mind worked relentlessly. Every detail mattered. Every habit of hers, every ally she had, every legal loophole or personal weakness became a thread I could pull. Revenge, I realized, wasn't spontaneous. It was a meticulous construction, a chessboard where patience outweighed brute force. I started by observing her from a distance. She moved with a confidence that masked her cruelty. She had friends, lawyers, even my own acquaintances convinced of her innocence. But even in her perfect composure, I could see cracks, moments of hesitation, small gestures that betrayed a fear of exposure. Those would be the entry points. I just had to find the right lever to push. Money and property had been taken, yes, but I had something more valuable: knowledge, history, and the intimate understanding of my son's life, what Peter wanted, what Peter trusted me with, the decisions he made behind closed doors. She had assumed that I would vanish quietly, that my grief would render me powerless. But grief, I realized, could sharpen rather than dull if wielded correctly. I began making lists, everything I knew, every possible vulnerability. Her finances, her legal maneuvers, the people she leaned on. I revisited old documents, old emails, contracts Peter had signed, anything that could be leveraged. I reached out quietly to friends I trusted, not for confrontation, but for information. I didn't want an army, I wanted precision. I wanted moves so clean and silent she wouldn't know the trap had been sprung until it was too late. Late nights became my laboratory. I traced patterns, identified routines, and predicted behavior. She left small clues: overconfidence, arrogance, subtle boasts to mutual acquaintances. I cataloged them meticulously. Each clue was a potential weapon, each observation a stepping stone toward reclaiming what was stolen. But the mental preparation was just as critical as the practical. I forced myself to confront my own weaknesses, the parts of me that might betray me under pressure. My temper, my grief, my lingering sentimentality, they could ruin everything if left unchecked. I meditated, I rehearsed conversations silently, I tested the boundaries of patience. If I was going to dismantle her carefully constructed world, I had to be unshakable, calculating, and invisible until the moment of execution. By the end of the week, I had created a blueprint, a plan that accounted for every contingency, every reaction she might have. It was not impulsive. It was surgical. And as I looked over the files I had amassed, the patterns I had uncovered, I felt something I hadn't in weeks control. For the first time since Peter's burial, I felt like I had the power to change the course of events. Not with fists, not with anger, but with precision. I understood fully that the coming weeks would test not just my intellect, but my patience, my endurance, and my moral compass. One misstep, one premature move, and all could be lost. But the stakes were too high to falter. This was more than revenge, it was restoration. It was justice. It was proof that betrayal, no matter how meticulous, could be met with even greater strategy. The first move is always the quietest. That's what people never understand. Revenge doesn't begin with confrontation. It begins with doubt. And doubt spreads best when the victim doesn't even know they've been touched. I didn't go after Vanessa directly. Not yet. Instead, I nudged the world around her. I started with the smallest thread I had uncovered during my preparation, a discrepancy in one of Peter's final investment accounts. On paper, it looked insignificant, numbers shifting days before his death, signatures that were technically valid but emotionally wrong. Peter had always consulted me before major financial decisions. Always, except that one. I anonymously forwarded the information to an independent compliance auditor I knew from my old professional life. No accusations, no emotional language. Just facts, clean, neutral, irrefutable. I knew it wouldn't trigger an immediate explosion, but it would plant a seed, an inquiry, a pause, a question mark where there had once been certainty. Then I moved to people. Grief makes people talk. And Vanessa had been talking a little too freely. I reconnected with her circle, friends who thought I was just a broken old man trying to find closure. I let them speak. I listened. I nodded. I let silence do the work. When someone mentioned how efficiently Vanessa had handled Peter's affairs, I simply said, yes, Peter trusted very few people at the end. Nothing more. The room always shifted after that, just slightly. Enough. I watched the ripple spread. Within days, her posture changed. She smiled less. Her confidence became tighter, rehearsed. She started calling her lawyer more often. I knew because one of the assistants, someone I had once helped get a recommendation years earlier, mentioned it casually. Vanessa didn't know it yet, but her world had begun to tilt. The most satisfying moment came quietly. I received a message from her, short, polite, almost civil. I think we should talk. I didn't reply. That silence was deliberate. Silence forces imagination to fill the gaps, and imagination is far crueler than truth. I wanted her wondering what I knew, who I had spoken to, how far I was willing to go. I wanted her sleeping lightly, checking locks, rereading documents she once believed were flawless. But the real execution, the one that mattered most, was internal. For the first time since my son's death, I felt steady, not happy, not relieved, but focused. Every action I took was controlled, intentional. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was directing. And that shift from victim to architect changed everything. I stood outside the old house one evening, watching lights flick on behind the windows that used to be mine. I didn't feel rage. I felt patience, because I knew something she didn't. This was only the opening move. And openings aren't meant to win the game. They're meant to position you so your opponent can't escape what's coming. By the third week, the tension had become almost tangible. Vanessa moved through the house like a general in a fortress she no longer fully controlled. Her allies, lawyers, friends, even distant family, had started second-guessing her. The cracks I had patiently nudged open were widening, and the control she thought she had was slipping. I didn't need to rush. Revenge is a storm you unleash only when the air is thick and heavy, when the opponent feels invincible but secretly fears it. I had her there, right where I wanted her. I made contact with her financial advisor directly, under the guise of concern for Peter's legacy. I presented carefully curated errors in her management of the estate, small discrepancies I had unearthed, dressed as genuine questions. I didn't accuse, I suggested, I implied, and in doing so I seeded panic. She couldn't call me out publicly without exposing herself. Yet every day she had to look over her shoulder, knowing the questions might lead somewhere she couldn't control. Then came the confrontation, not the one I wanted, but the one I needed. She showed up at my temporary residence, her posture tight, eyes sharp, smile brittle. "Harold," she said, voice even, almost rehearsed. "I don't know what game you think you're playing. You've been busy." I let her words hang in the air. My silence was deliberate, a mirror reflecting back the doubt I had planted. Her lips twitched briefly, almost imperceptibly, and that was enough. "You've already cost me time, energy, friends," she continued. "I suggest you stop. There's nothing left for you here." I leaned forward slightly. "Nothing left for me? Vanessa, everything Peter built was ours. And everything you've taken from me, you've done it because you believed I would do nothing." Her eyes narrowed. "And now," I said softly, letting the words sink, "you have a choice. You can keep pretending the rules don't apply to you, or you can start answering questions you never thought you'd have to." She stepped back, a flicker of unease crossing her face. I could see it in the way her hands trembled ever so slightly. She wasn't just worried about money or legal trouble. She was worried about exposure, about consequences, about the fact that I had become something she could not control. The confrontation ended without a fight. No shouting, no threats, just the silent acknowledgement that a shift had occurred. The balance of power had changed. She had underestimated me for too long, and now she realized that every move she made was under observation, and every lie she told could be undone. As she left, I stood in the doorway, watching her retreating figure, and understood something crucial. Revenge is not a single act. It's escalation, it's pressure, it's turning a seemingly invincible opponent into someone who fears the ground beneath their feet. The days after the confrontation were surreal. Vanessa's carefully curated world began to fray at the edges, and I watched it unravel like a storm slowly devouring a fragile village. Her calls became frantic, meetings with lawyers grew longer, and she began second, guessing every decision she had made since Peter's death. I didn't need to lift a finger beyond my calculated moves. The seeds I had planted had taken root, and the consequences were unfolding in real time. Her friends started avoiding her. Whispers followed her in social gatherings, subtle, almost imperceptible, but sharp enough to slice her confidence. Even her lawyers hinted at caution, at revisiting choices she had made under her own overconfidence. The walls she had built around herself were collapsing, brick by brick, and each crumbling piece reminded me of the life she had tried to erase. I, on the other hand, felt an unexpected calm. It was not satisfaction, it was a deep, steady validation. Watching her struggle was not cruelty, it was justice. Every sleepless night I had endured, every hour spent cataloging her weaknesses, every bit of restraint I had exercised, it all culminated in this. And yet, there was a hollowness to it too. Revenge has a cost, and even as I saw her falter, I could not ignore the toll it had taken on me. Sleep came in short fragments, meals were forgotten, and memories of Peter haunted me relentlessly. And then came the final blow, not mine, but the one her own choices delivered. A legal review revealed that certain documents she had signed, under the guise of legitimacy, were not just questionable, they were vulnerable. She had overlooked details, assumed my absence would leave her untouchable. But the very system she had tried to manipulate now turned against her. Suddenly, everything she had seized, the house, the estate, the investments, was under scrutiny. I did not celebrate. I did not gloat. I simply watched. And in that silence, I realized the power of consequence is far more effective than any act of overt revenge. It was subtle, relentless, unavoidable. Like gravity, it pulled everything toward equilibrium. And then came the most surprising realization: revenge had changed me. Not in the way that people imagine, anger or malice, but in clarity. In patience, in understanding that justice is not about immediate gratification, but about measured action. The woman who had once seemed untouchable, impervious to morality or empathy, was now forced to confront her own decisions, her own betrayal, and her own vulnerability. I walked through the quiet of my temporary home, the weight of the past few weeks pressing on me. I thought of Peter, of the home we had shared, of the life that Vanessa had tried to erase. And I understood something crucial: the fallout of betrayal is not just for the betrayer. It reshapes the betrayer and the betrayed alike. By the time the fourth week arrived, Vanessa's world had shifted irreversibly. She no longer carried the air of untouchable authority. Calls went unanswered, her legal maneuvers slowed under scrutiny, and the friends who once whispered in her favor now hesitated, uncertain. Her power had crumbled quietly, methodically, and I had been the silent architect. But I did not rush to reclaim the house, the estate, or even the memories she had attempted to erase. The victories of revenge are sweeter when measured, when observed from a distance with detachment. I had taken what I came for, not possessions, not public recognition, but validation. The knowledge that betrayal, no matter how precise or well disguised, could not erase my existence, my dignity, or my son's legacy. I returned to the old house one evening, the first time in weeks. The walls were silent, the air heavy with absence. Memories of Peter and Eleanor filled every corner, and yet, instead of pain, I felt a strange serenity. I walked slowly through the rooms, imagining the laughter, the small victories, the quiet moments that had once defined our family. It was bittersweet, but it was mine to remember, not hers. Not altered, in the following months, life settled into a fragile rhythm. Vanessa tried to rebuild, but the foundation she had so carefully constructed was forever weakened. She had learned the hard way that manipulation, cruelty, and betrayal are fragile shields against the consequences of one's actions. And as for me, I found a new equilibrium, not a life of stolen comfort, but a life of quiet control. I had proven, first to myself and then to her, that wisdom, patience, and calculated action are more powerful than fury. The experience left scars, of course. Grief does not vanish. Betrayal leaves echoes that linger in the mind long after the immediate danger passes. But those scars were reminders, not weaknesses. They were proof that I had endured, adapted, and emerged with clarity. Peter's memory remained untarnished by deceit, protected not by law or luck, but by the deliberate strategy of one who loved him and refused to be silenced. Sitting by the fireplace one quiet evening, I reflected on the past weeks. Revenge had not been about hate. It had been about justice. About reclaiming agency in a world that had tried to strip me of it. About ensuring that those who betray cannot do so without consequence. I realized that true power does not come from violence or intimidation. It comes from patience, precision, and the unwavering pursuit of what is rightfully yours. And as I stared into the flames, I understood the ultimate lesson life had handed me. Betrayal is inevitable. Grief is unavoidable, and injustice is real, but how we respond defines who we truly are. I chose strategy over impulse, silence over anger, and patience over rashness. In that choice lay not only my revenge, but my redemption. Moral reflection: life may bring betrayal, loss, and injustice, but measured action, patience, and strategic resolve allow one to reclaim dignity, protect what is sacred, and confront wrongdoing with clarity and purpose.